Okay, so we all know when Michelle Obama came out with her book about becoming, this is all about our self-discovery, and it happens through self-assessment. Sometimes the self-assessment happens within ourselves just in walking and talking in our daily walk. But sometimes it can be a little bit more intentional. And when it's intentional, that's when we want to be able to take a closer look and really explore what that means. I'm sorry here. I need to go back a couple. There we go. So what you'll need for today's experience, I really just want you to open up and embrace what emerges for you. And that's about leaving the top open, whatever flows out of you, but also whatever flows into you from other comments, from yourself, and just your feelings, as Caroline so beautifully shared with us, just beginning to tap into that. You may need a pen and paper if you're going to participate or ask a few questions. So have that handy. And there is an exercise to get us started about self-assessment that I will have us work on together. Very quick, but a lot of fun. And you can use it as our first tool. I'm actually putting up my contact information here, and I will make the slides available to Debbie to share with all of you once our session is over today. But feel free to reach out to me and contact me at any time after the presentation, regarding the presentation, or just having general questions just about lifing in general, because I am here for that, and it's my passion and my purpose. So let's take a look at self-assessment and self-discovery, how it ties to emotional intelligence and communication with self. And that's really how I like to look at self-assessments. A lot of times people can have anxiety about self-assessments because we want to be our authentic self, but we're not quite sure sometimes what the assessment is looking for. Sometimes people want to second guess the assessment because we get caught up in those roles of what should we look like? How do we want to really present ourselves rather than really digging in and taking a look at who we really are? And the first thing that I want to say to all of you beautiful faces out there is you are enough. You are exactly who you are meant to be. And right now, excuse me, you are in a space of growing, learning, and expanding. And that includes the exact space and time that you're in right now. So when we look at self-discovery and assessment, I have two columns here. The first one for today is looking at what it helps us do. It helps us to go inward, and it allows us that time to reflect, because when we take a self-assessment, we don't just do it on the fly, but when we receive that information, it begins to lay down a little bit of a network inside of us biologically and physically to let us know there's something that's going on that we're looking at and we're trying to process. And when we take the time to reflect on that, then we actually have the opportunity to say, what does that mean for me? Where do I find meaning? Not what somebody else is interpreting, not what somebody else is seeing, but what do I see? What am I reflecting on? And how is it moving me? And with that, then we can look at how we want to expand outward. Sometimes expanding outward means kind of shoring up those hard areas and hard edges that we have where we don't move forward. Sometimes expanding outward can definitely mean, wow, maybe I can look at that a little differently and I can shift, change, and maybe practice some things a little differently and get a different result. But the best thing about it is if we're doing it in a way that's serving us, it's unedited. So when you go into the self-assessment, it is coming from heart, it is coming from mind, and it is coming from belly. What's in your gut, right? Because that gut response is your intuition and who you actually are. And that's trying to connect with your heart and your mind. But we want unedited because that, as you see later on, is going to give us a baseline from where we want to operate. And of course, self-assessment is looking at our authentic self. And that's sometimes one of those key phrases that's out there. I want to move authentically. I want to be authentic in the workplace. I want to be authentic with who I am. Sometimes people think authentic is about, I'm just going to tell you how I see it and tell you how I feel and call that being direct. Well, that is being direct, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's being authentic. So authentic can really mean a way of establishing who we are in our reality, establishing who we are in our true sense of self, and establishing who we are and how we want to connect and how we want to be perceived in the world around us. So let me plant those seeds a little bit. And I'm hoping that our takeaways for today is going to be that you have an opportunity to level up on your communication. And that's communication with yourself, because sometimes we play games with our own selves about who we think we are. And it's about leveling up our communication with others and the world around us. And step into your self-discovery for some new movement and new ways of being. And if you lean into self-assessment, it can be an ongoing practice of self-awareness and that emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence is a way of looking at how do we tap into what we're perceiving around us? How do we respond to the world around us once we perceive it? And how are we responding to individuals responding to us? Are we able to have that insight, or are we still in a blind spot where we're not really seeing what someone else may see about us or what we're perceiving about them in their world? So I'm hoping that this will be an opportunity for us to explore that and answer some questions. And last but not least, it's my favorite. And those of you that have worked with me, you know, it's all about finding some fun and being open. And if we can't have fun with whatever we're doing, then it really doesn't make sense, because that to me is really what life is about, even in our own self-discovery. As I mentioned, it creates a baseline for us. It offers a client a new perspective. It offers clarity and some positive intelligence blind spots on how we want to operate. And a self-assessment can also be a clear mirror, or it can be a positive disruptor. And what do I mean by positive disruptor? That means you recognize something that may not be working, but you recognize that you can do something a little differently with positive energy that can disrupt that old behavior or that old meaning and take you to a new place. And I'm hoping that that's helpful for you. Now, how you can use it with employees or with yourself, and how I use it with clients, is if a client seems to be overwhelmed, if there's frustration, uncertainty, if there's questioning about who they are, and if they are unfocused about where they want to go and what they need to do for themselves. So it's a baseline, and it truly does help us. So I'm going to cover 4 to 5 basic assessments today with our time. And wherever we stop, I want you to know that I have a website for each one of those, estimated costs, and a way for you to tap into it. And of course, tap into me and send me an email, and I can connect you with whatever assessment you want to tap into. These are 4 to 5 of my favorites, but there's a world of assessments out there. But I like to use these because it allows us to tap in quickly, and it allows us to really take a look inside in an authentic way that's not judgy, and that allows the person to feel safe. So one is going to be the 4 Ps, and that's where I'm going to have you participate with me. The next will be Barrett Values Assessment, and then Positive Intelligence, which really kind of taps into some old tapes and saboteurs and triggers that come from childhood and have come with us through our adulthood, even into our leadership roles. And then a little into 360 leadership profiles, and then hopefully tapping into the DISC a little bit, which you may be familiar with, and maybe the Myers-Briggs. But I want to give you these 4 up front because these are the 4 to 5 that I use quite often with my clients. So before we get into the 4 Ps, as leaders, I want to ask, where do we lead and where do we communicate from? As women, how do we empower ourselves? How do we look at the way we interact and really collaborate and enable ourselves to be a part of something greater than ourselves? A lot of times we lead from our own comfort zone, the comfort zone that we've been used to and how we're used to speaking, talking, and interacting with people. I want to challenge that just a little bit today. And then it's about, can we shift ourselves and connect in a little bit of a different way that invites others in, invites others to be curious, and invites ourselves to take a look at something from a different viewpoint that might cause us to expand and grow a little bit rather than being in defense and protective mode. And then if we're not made clear, or if our point isn't made clear, are we courageous enough to ask the other, what can I do to make this clearer for you? Or how can it be clearer for you? And then I can reshare information. And that's the point. As we lead, we want to communicate. And as we communicate, we motivate. And as we motivate, then we see movement and we see some magical things happen. And the result is that we have clarity, we have connection. And I want to use this word, we have response. And response is different than reaction. So response means taking it in, sitting in it, and then choosing. And I use that word in parentheses as well, or quotes, choosing how we move forward, whether it's split second or a few minutes, rather than reaction, which is a knee jerk and oftentimes tapping into a trigger. So just to give you that to think about. So let's jump into the 4 Ps. So the 4 Ps, and I'm going to come out after I share this because I want to see everybody's number. So there are 4 things as a tool that we all need every single day. Every time we are chatting, connecting, interacting with people, we need to know the purpose. Why are we changing and doing something? And that's number 1. Number 2, what's the picture? What will the change look like? Why are we doing this in a way that it looks this way? And then number 3, what's the plan? How are we going to do this? And what are the steps to get that done? And then 4 is, what's the part? What is my role in this? What will it mean for me? So now I want you to sit in this for a minute, and I'm going to come out, but I want to share with you how this works. So all the P's have a certain order for each of us. My order is 2, I need the big picture. 1, I need to know the meaning, the why. And then 3, I need to know the plan. And then 4, I can figure out my role. So my number is 2, 1, 3, 4. That's my pattern. 2, 1, 3, 4. So as you can see, I even started off today by showing you this is what the big picture is going to be. And this is why we're doing it. And here's the plan about doing this. And this is what's going to be your part in it. It's participating. So 2, 1, 3, 4 is mine. I'm going to do a quick stop share. And looking at that, I want you to take a look right now and jot down what's your order. And what are the numbers in your order for you? And then after you have that, I want to stop share and put them in the chat so we can all see. So I'll give you about 30 seconds to pick your order. And pick it by number if you can. So I'm going to do a quick stop share and come out. So can anybody share with me what your order number is? Just throw it in the chat so I can see. Is there more clarity needed? Oh, I'm seeing it now. All right. So Christina, I see the 1, 2, 3, 4, I think it was. All of them are populating. That's beautiful. 1, 4, 2, 3, 1, 3, 2, 4, 1, 3, 4, 2, 1, 3, 2, 4, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 4, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so on. So my point in this is that if we recognize that each one of us are leading with a different number and it's a different order for each of us, then that means that when I'm sharing in my comfort zone, in my way, it may not be connecting with the person that I'm speaking with. Because maybe that person, let's say like Gwen is a 4, 1, 2, 3. And she's oftentimes like my business partner or the person that I do workshops with. That person wants to know, what's my part first, right? What do I need to do? What do you need from me? And then we can move forward. For me, I really want to know and understand the big picture and what that means so I can then begin to put things in an order for me. But if I'm leading my way, then sometimes I might lose a person like Gwen for wanting to be connected with a project like that or asking her to do something because I'm not giving her what she needs to even feel comfortable with stepping into that space. So if we recognize and you look at those 4 Ps and you know where you are in them, think about it when you're offering your information. What is it that somebody else needs to understand and connect with you first? And sometimes in the work environment, this can be fun and easy to do. You can do it at a team meeting and you can begin to get some insight about the people working around you. And it may help you figure out, why didn't someone jump right into this? Why didn't someone respond like I needed them to? Well, it could be their connection wasn't there yet. But if you can use this as an immediate communication tool, it can begin to break down some of those barriers and take a look at how you want to operate going forward, not only individually, but as a team or as partners. So I'm saying, if you don't start me with purpose, we're not going anywhere. I get it, because it's got to make sense to you in that way. Um, Christina, this is interesting. A reminder that there is more than one way to approach things, most definitely. So let me go back to sharing my screen, and glad that that is resonating with some of you. And I'll pick right up where we left off. Great. So tuck that away. That's one tool. It's an assessment. That's easy. It's quick. And you figure out, who am I and who's the person that I'm working with or speaking with. And you simply ask them. So when I said, do we have the courage enough to ask? I might be able to say, you know what, I'm leading with the big picture. What do you need to know from me that I'm going to share with you first? And you might say, I need to know what my part is, or what's the plan to do this, because, I need to have some surety or some certainty in a different way than you do. And that's just the openness and connecting and leading. So now let's jump into Barrett values. And I'm conscious of our time, so I definitely want to make sure that we have some time to explore, but be mindful. So we're going to really go on what I call a magic carpet ride, but it's a way to kind of give you an oversight and a view at a 10,000 foot level at some of these assessments. So the Barrett values assessment, if any of you have taken this before, if you could raise your hand or just put it in the chat, perhaps Debbie or someone can share with me, yes, there are some, or no, there are not. But for all of us, in getting us on the same page, the Barrett Values Assessment is a great one that I love, because it helps us to explore and understand and revisit, what are our personal values? And if I'm looking at work or personal relationships, how does it align with my organization's values? And how does it align with my personal relationship values, whether it's friendships, families, romantic things, or people, whatever. But it's a way to take inventory and check in on where you are on that. And the Barrett values is very reasonable, because it allows you to go to the website. You can take what they call the PVA, which is the personal values assessment. And as you look at the personal values assessment, it offers a few things. It offers some grounding with who you are right then at the moment, and gives you some clarity on why you might be feeling a certain way about certain things happening in your life. It also gives you some creativity as to how you can expand outward by looking at where your markers are falling. And I'll get into that in just a minute. And then some clarity around, what's your current status, and did you know that, and were you feeling that because you weren't quite sure where these feelings were coming from, and is it possible to embrace a way to move forward? So the biggest piece about the Barrett values is that it is going to ask you a series of questions, and if you take the one for yourself, it's going to ask you key questions that really kind of map to Maslow's hierarchy a little bit. It's going to ask you questions that tie into, are things being met around your survival? And we know that that's basic elements: food, shelter, finance, all of that. And then it's going to ask you questions about relationships, friendships, work relationships, and how that is sitting in your life. And then it's going to ask you some self-esteem and how you're able to differentiate, is that somebody else's issue or is it my issue? And do I need to look at that, and how is it affecting me? And then on up the ladder, transformation, internal cohesion. Am I feeling like things are coming together and I'm truly becoming? And then how do I make a difference in acts of service? Now, depending on where we are in our life, you're going to score 2 to 3 times in probably multiple areas. And I want you to understand that, and that's okay. But let me share with you how this can be impactful. Let's say you are a female, you've been in a long-term marriage, and all of a sudden the marriage decides to dissolve, and it's mutual, and where everything was actually very stable, where you were looking at good relationships and making a difference in your world and in the work that you do, if you go through, let's say, a divorce or what I call one of those events of trauma, it's going to send you back down here to survival mode and trying to figure out, what do I need to do to reconstruct these relationships and get my self-esteem back together? And we may not recognize that. We may feel torn because we may feel like, well, I normally have all of these things together. I can get it together. I know what I'm supposed to do. However, I'm feeling out of touch or out of sorts. And that is what this helps us to do. It helps us to recognize where we are and how we can put things back in order and sitting in the place where we are. So when we're looking at our emotional intelligence around where we actually sit on that Barrett value scale, it gives us some insight onto not only our personal competence and our own self-awareness, but how we regulate ourselves. And then the other side of that is our social competence, because how we regulate ourselves is definitely going to flow out to how we interact socially and how we use those skills in relationship management that can affect us personally or in the job. And so at this point, I want to ask, are there any questions that came up for you about the Barrett value scale before we go forward? We okay?
We are. There's none in the chat, but Daphne did share that this is these insights are reminding her of the importance of using our curiosity to be open-minded. So that was what resonated with Daphne, but I don't see any additional questions in the chat right now.
Absolutely. And so what I want to share as we begin to move forward in this is recognizing that on your Barrett values assessment, wherever your markers are showing up most and sharing with you where you are present time, it doesn't mean that those can't shift with you changing events or changing practices in your life. The biggest ones I see with my clients that I serve right now, it's all about transformation. Where do I go from here? What's my next move? Where am I going in career? What do I really want to become? I have children that are going off to college. I'm becoming an empty nester. What does that mean for me? And what does that mean in terms of my own transformation? And that's normally a crossroads. So I want you to tap into that a little bit, because we are all in areas of transformation. It just depends on how much that's going to impact us with where we're sitting right now. If we're working on a job and we've been there for a while and we're looking toward retirement, and maybe that's 10 years or 5 years or 15 years out, we're going to be in a different level of transformation than someone who's looking at starting a different career or going into entrepreneurship or looking at a real true life change. So I just want to put that in there for you to think about. And also think about, when we're talking about service and giving back, a real big piece of my practice and wholeness is looking at, how do we give back to humanity? How do we give back to each other? And how do we hold space and stand in that regard for each other? And you may do that in different ways. In the role that you're currently in, you see a way of serving. In a role that you want to be in, maybe it's volunteering, or maybe just a way of something you want to create to be able to give back at certain times. So these elements can pop up for us, and it's just knowing how they pop up and how we're going to use them at that time. I'm going to bypass this. So I want to jump into positive intelligence assessment. And the positive intelligence assessment, as I mentioned as one of the 4 to 5 I want to talk about, is one that I love to use, because this is about mental fitness. And it's a little different than Barrett values, because Barrett values really gets into what I believe, what I grow up thinking is important, what I use day to day to operate. And the one thing I will connect back on for Barrett values, I mentioned individual and I mentioned organizational values. And if you are in conflict right now and not feeling good about where you are in the job or with the organization you are, Barrett values will give you the opportunity to take a look and actually rate what you think are your organization's values and you rate your values, and then you take a look, are they really mapping together? So one of the things I do, having 25 years in workforce development, I ask people, where is it that you want to work? How do you want to serve? And what does that look like for you? And a lot of times it can say, somebody might say, well, I really want to work for the government. There's a lot of security there. It's that financial security that I want, and I can go every day and I know that I'm going to get a for sure paycheck. So that shares with me, well, maybe they're looking at survival stuff and getting that really leveled off for them. But then what I'll also hear is, but they're just not flexible. I can't telework. And I know those that might be in DC government or other government areas, I only have limited telework, or I've got to come in certain days, or I have to plug in 9 to 5, or they want me available at this point and this point. And so you find that there's a conflict with the values. The person wants more freedom and more autonomy to work on their own personal energy schedule, which might happen if they work remotely and don't necessarily have to be present in the office. And so that value has shifted. So looking at what the organization wants and what you want, you might have to look at, have my values shifted enough so that it doesn't really work with the current organization that I'm with? And if that doesn't work, then that's the opportunity with that assessment where we begin to take a look at, do we need to look at another opportunity? Are there other viable options out there? Do we need to look at a different way of being and operating within that space if you choose to stay? Or do I need to look for a total new entity that really overlays and overlaps with all the values that I want? And I work with a lot of millennials and Gen Zers, and they really love this idea of operating in a time span where, as long as they're getting the job done, they can feel really good about what they're contributing. But what I also find, and especially after the pandemic, we need to take a look at, what are the organization's needs and how you want to fit into that. And does it fit for a short time or no time at all? And then you can provide a pathway out of that if you need to, or look at a pathway in if that's something you prefer. But looking at positive intelligence, this was created by a person by the name of Shameen Shahzad, and he actually did his research and his education work at Stanford and developed this model that came up with, how do we explore our mental fitness? How do we understand our personal saboteurs and our own triggers? And then how do we tap into that sage, that inner wisdom that we have and that we know we have, to see our way out of it? What I love about this one is that the cost is free. You can go onto the website and you can actually take the saboteur assessment and take a look at where you fit on the scale. And then there's a way to facilitate how you begin to use your own inner wisdom to see yourself out of that. Now, let me just tap into this a little bit, because this goes a little deeper with my coaching. It takes a look at what's triggering you, where are you defensive, and where are you perhaps missing the connection. And as I opened up with, self-assessment is all about self-discovery, but it really is about communication as leaders. And if we're blocking ourselves based on old tapes and voices that we have in our head, that may come from old value systems, but come from really trying to survive, then we need to take a look at that and look at how we can really kind of develop and uplift our mental fitness. So the saboteurs that are rated in the positive intelligence assessment, you can see here on the left, and all of them have potential within all of us. The biggest one is the judge, and that's listed first. And that comes with how we judge others, how we judge ourselves, how we judge situations. Sometimes we don't even know it. But the biggest thing that I want you to walk away from this is recognizing, what did you learn in childhood and how to survive? And how is that carrying over for you, even in your walk right now, as a leader, in your relationships, in your situationships? How is that stepping in and taking over? And that judge, along with all of these others, do you avoid things? Do you need to be the one in control? Are you a hyperachiever? I always got to do the best and be the best and get the A and always be the front runner. All of those are elements of how we were able to survive, and in that feeling of how do I get to that highest level, what I thought was my personal goal, coming from that reference of survival. Hyper rational, that person is about, well, maybe it's not so bad. If we did 2 or 3 things differently a little way, it could come out a little differently, and always making light sometimes of very serious situations. And then we probably all know the pleaser. The pleaser is the person that wants to be liked, wants everyone to really understand them and enjoy them. And the reality is, it takes us to a point of doing things in a non-authentic way to really kind of please everybody else. And this is where we look at boundaries. So if I can't hold on to my own boundaries because I really want to please someone else and have them like what I'm doing, or really know that I'm a part of their team, it's going to tire me out and burn me out because I'm too busy trying to please rather than walking in my authentic space. And then we have the victim, which I believe is self-explanatory. It's the woe is me. Everything is happening to me, and it's happening to me because I don't deserve goodness, all those things. And then restless is you can't sit still. You always got to be doing something, because when you're busy, you feel like you're getting things done. If you're busy, 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 you don't give yourself a chance to sit down, be present in the moment, take inventory, and figure out, what is it that really serves me? How do I take care of myself so I can take care of others? And then how do I want that to reflect in my own behavior and in the way that I'm engaging with others? And then the stickler. The stickler, if you've ever worked with somebody on a team that's a stickler, they're not going to let it go until it is exactly right and perfect. And it's got to be just so. And when that stickler comes out, that's a perfectionist attitude. And that perfectionist way of being doesn't allow the person to let go. They can't let go to move forward, to move on, because it has to be just right. And in my years in project management, and this is working in private, for a private industry, that project management piece, as the leader of a project or as the project manager, it really taught me a lot, because if we're so geared on perfectionism, it can hold up a project and create a bottleneck where the rest of the team is waiting, or the project does not meet deadlines because you have one person or a group of people that are sticklers that don't want to let it go and release it so that we can have input and have it move forward. So I ask you, is your stickler kicking in when something or something comes up? Do you hold on to it, or can you let it go? And that's what that's about. And so if you can take the assessment, which I'm going to show you real quick, and look at where you fall, we look at maybe the top 3 or 4, and then you can look at, gosh, what do I need to do to adjust and shift that so that I can move differently and heal myself and become really mentally fit? Because I'll tell you this, as leaders, all of you, all of us, are able to tap into that inner sage, that wisdom spot within ourselves, that when the chips are down and when we are challenged and when we are calm and clear and focused, we can get things done. We do well. We excel. We feel good. We feel validated within ourselves. That's that sage coming forward to say, you know what, girl, you did that. You know what, she rocked that. And that's because it's activated and you have been able to shut out perhaps some of those voices that maybe held you back before. So if I look here and I go into just showing you what that assessment looks like, here's what it looks like. You take it, ask you some questions, and it's quick. This and the Barrett values, along with the 4 Ps like I showed you, this right here will take you no more than 5 to 10 minutes. And like I said, it is free, and the report comes to your email account. You can take a look at it and see where you rate, and it'll explain each one in detail. If you need more help, you can reach out to me as a facilitator of this, but it also gives you guidance if you want to tap into the website itself. But this, it'll rate you. And we look at anything that scores over a 5. So as you can see here, I'll try to make that a little bit bigger. You can see that their pleaser is high, their hyperachiever is high, their stickler is high, their controller is high. And then the next one down is hyper rational, but that's at a 4. So we kind of release that and let that go. But if I were looking at this person's profile, I would be looking at someone who definitely wants to be liked and wants to be included in all things that says this person is okay, this person is great, and they need that external validation. And I want to make that very clear, that external validation. The hyperachiever, this person most likely got a lot of validation from doing very well in school, being the smartest in the class, getting the best grades, always wanting to be the best athlete, whatever that was. That hyperachiever and that competitiveness is there. Now, I'm not saying any of this is wrong, but what we look at in our lives and when we're lifing is, where is your balance? Where do you look at that and how does it weigh out with your wellness and your wholeness? And as you can see in this rating, the stickler is high. So that means not only are they competitive and they want to please, but they're not going to release something until it's almost perfect, or until it makes perfect sense to them, which actually excludes other people from being involved in that process until they're ready to release it. So bringing this back down a little bit, if we look at how we begin to approach this from a coaching standpoint, taking a look at where you are in the here and now, we look at, okay, what's the sage work that has to happen? What's the mental fitness and the emotional intelligence that needs to occur? And when you do the positive intelligence assessment, it's going to give you ways of being and doing and operating that can intercept those negative thoughts and behaviors. And I'll ask you just to put maybe in the chat or write down for yourselves, depends on your own comfort zone. Do you have those thoughts that creep in that sabotage you? Are they coming in and keeping you from being the best version of yourself? You know, I did a workshop with leaders, female leaders in academia, all PhDs, very accomplished, working at various universities. And can anyone guess what was the main thing that popped up for them in their negative thoughts and behaviors? If you can throw it in the chat and somebody can read it to me, that would be great. What do you think was the main thing that came up for them?
So you're getting a lot of hyperachiever, imposter.
Yes.
Smart enough.
Yes, absolutely. Here, these women are accomplished leaders, trailblazers in their own field, in their own work, and questioning themselves because that negative talk or that little voice in their head is telling them, I don't deserve to be here, or how did I get here, or I really don't know as much as I think that I know in this world that I'm in. And so the mental fitness and the positive intelligence really taps into ways that you can look at how to put those negative thoughts out of there, intercede, provide an interception so you can quiet them. They may not ever go away because they're with us from the time we're very young, but we can quiet them. And it's kind of like when I explain it, you know, when you see that little angel on one shoulder and the little devil on the other, you tell one, I need you to shut up. Just go all the way up and just close your mouth and let me listen to this side over here. And sometimes we tend to listen to more of the negative than the angel on the other side. And that's where the sage pops in. That's the angel on the other side. And that's how we intercept that. So I see here, practice things that are new and practice new ways of being and new ways of self-care. Excuse that typo there. But when we look at this, we actually have to take a look at, if I'm really being a stickler, what's the thing that I can do to not be a stickler? I can look at being more self-accepting, allowing myself grace. It's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to have to do something over again. It's okay for it not to be perfect. Now, I share this with you because some of you in leadership roles, this taps into and rolls over into your teams. How many of you have a stickler inside of you where anything anyone gives you is never good enough? And you might say, I'm just pushing that person to be the best person they can be. But is that push relevant for them? And remember, in that 4 Ps, we all have different ways of receiving, communicating, understanding. And when we are in this negative mode, in this sense of being in a self-sabotage mode, we don't have compassion. We don't have empathy, and we don't see from the view of the person that we're putting the pressure on. So not only do we put the pressure on ourselves, but we put pressure on others because we project that onto them. So we want to take a look at how we can operate in a new way of being. So maybe the way of operating is to say, well, turn that in. Let's see what you have, and we'll work from there. We may have to do round 1 iteration, round 2 iteration, round 3 iteration. How many times do we say, well, this is going to be document 2.0 or 4.0? If we allow ourselves that grace, and we allow members of our team to know that it's okay if it's not perfect the first time, or if they fail somewhat, as leaders, we're there to intercept and allow them that grace to learn by exploring and being curious, and not necessarily having things be right. And I put right in quotes because the right in quotes can get us all into a lot of trouble, because things are relative based on your perspective. So you can tap into and activate your own knowing, which is your own inner sage of saying, you know, I need to step back on that. And the reason that positive intelligence is important is because then you can name it. And remember, I shared this is about self-assessment and self-talk and communicating with self. So if I'm into something and I'm going, oh my goodness, I've just said yes to doing 4 things that are outside of my boundary schedule. And then I have a talk with myself and I go, Paris, that's your pleaser kicking in. You need to have pleaser be quiet, because your commitment to yourself for 2024, I want clear boundaries. When I say I'm not working on a project, then that's the time that it ends. And then I'll pick it back up when I know it's comfortable for me in negotiation with the person that I'm in contract with or in conversation with. And I share that as an example because that's how the saboteur can come in and take away your new way of being. You may already recognize it, but if you recognize it, do you have the action to go into it? And that's where you tap in and activate your own knowing for success. So let me just come out of here for a little bit. I want to see what we're going to next. That's going to be our leadership circle. I want to do a stop share and do a little bit of a check-in, and I'm looking at time as well. And I think we're still doing good. We got about 10 minutes left. So are there any questions that have come up with you, especially on positive intelligence, emotional intelligence, the values, and how you communicate with your number, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 4, 1, 2, 3 so far?
So Paris, throughout the chat while you were presenting, and this is phenomenal, getting a lot of feedback in the chat, the stickler definitely resonated with a lot of people. And then I know that Daphne wanted more information about the hyperachiever. You did dive into it as well too, but if you can just share a little bit more about the hyperachiever, that would be helpful.
Sure. So the hyperachiever can show up in all sorts of ways, and it may not necessarily be that you have to have the best grade in the class, but the hyperachiever can also be a driver on the team that says, we cannot lose. If they've given us a challenge at work, there's no way I'm taking a hit. You all better come up with the solution. I don't care if it takes overtime or whatever, but we have to win. And so that hyperachiever is in this bubble of winning at all costs. So if we're looking at winning at all costs, the only thing there is the energy to reach the finish line to say, I won. But where is the learning in the winning? Where is the learning in how we want to explore how we got there? So as leaders and in working with individuals and organizations, we always say celebrate your wins. So when you celebrate your wins, that's the window where you say, how do we do this? How did we get here? Look what we did. How are we able to accomplish this? And that's the reflection and the learning piece. But when you're stuck in hyperachiever, how many of you have ever worked on a team where you put out serious energy, got the work done, won the gold, grabbed the gold ring, and the next thing you know, your boss is like, okay, here's what we got to do tomorrow. Here's what's up for next week. You don't even get a chance to inhale and exhale. It's about the next win. And that next win can be an addictive piece because it doesn't allow time to slow down and stop and take a look at what did we really do where we learned and we actually won together and individually and gave ourselves a chance to breathe and really be present in that moment. So I'm hoping that's been helpful for the hyperachiever. Is that okay? I see Daphne, that one. I want to sip my water and breathe. Yes, absolutely. Okay. So
And
let
then
me
I
go
was going
ahead.
to say, there was one more question. I believe it tied to the Barrett values, the crossroad transformation. How do we transition to the next level?
Absolutely. That's a fabulous question. So remember, and I always say, because I'm a change management person as well and a change agent. And the one thing I always share with working with individuals and organizations about change, we can say, all right, this new policy effective tomorrow, no one parks in this parking lot. And that new rule is there. It's in black and white. But how many people will come in and forget the next day that they can't park in the parking lot and got to go back out and find a new place to park? So what I say about that with change and transformation is that you can identify what you want to change. I would like to be a little bit more in control of my block time for creativity. But if I'm constantly still doing old behaviors and taking phone calls and writing down and working on projects, then although I've said that, I'm not giving myself the opportunity to practice new ways of getting there. So that transformation means stating it, looking at how you're going to activate it, and giving yourself small steps to make that sure or make that happen. And it may take a little while. Change does not happen overnight. It may take a while for you to get to that state of, I'm in a new space and a new way of being. And a lot of times that ties in with emotions, and the emotions then tie into how we operate or how we react or respond. And remember, respond is the key word. So if you can sit and then choose how you want to respond, even if it's for a few seconds, that's different than an immediate reaction. Here I am, this is what I'm going to do. Because a lot of times when we stop and then reflect and then respond, in that moment, that's when we can choose what we want to do. And that goes from anything from you wanting to lose weight and dealing with the fact that you want to cut out sugar, if that's the case, or going to something that is talking about how I really want to operate in a relationship. I don't want to cut people off when they're talking anymore. I want to be able to hear fully what they have to say rather than already coming up with the answer before they finish. Those are different ways that transformation happens. So what do we say? Keep mouth closed, bite tongue. And you sit there and close your mouth so the other person can finish. And you feel that. That was difficult for me to be quiet until they finish. But those are the small steps to transformation. I hope that's helpful right there for an example. Okay. Debbie, let me check in with you. Do I have an opportunity to at least go back in and do a little bit on the leadership circle?
We have about 5 minutes left.
All right, let me jump back in real quick and at least do the closeout on that, and then I'll come back in, okay? Let me go back to share screen here and see if I can jump in real quickly. Let me go here. Go to the presentation. All right. So the leadership circle is one that's a little bit more complex, and it's really going to dive in some deeper areas. And I wanted to include it because it's one that I use quite often with my executive leadership clients and those that are in roles where they know that they're going to have to move in a different way. Maybe they are a new executive. Maybe they are executive taking on different responsibilities. Maybe it's someone that says, I want to be in an executive position. What are my blind spots? So the whole thing about the leadership circle profile, and with just having 5 minutes, I want to give a quick overview. I'm trying to bring the screen up a little bit so I can talk. So you can do this as an individual and you can do it as a team. You do it as an individual so you can take a look at what's really blocking you from being your best version of yourself. When you're doing it as a team, you're looking at what's blocking you, but what are your strengths to add to the team? But then your team is looking at Why is something either needing to be strengthened and not working, or we have some gaps with who's sitting in the seats? So the leadership circle is totally comprehensive, and I'm going to use my cursor here. You see the circle as a whole. Now hang on with me, guys, and we can talk later if you send me an email. But when you split this in half from the left to the right, on the upper half, you can see this whole piece is about being creative. On the bottom half, you can see this whole piece is about being reactive. Remember what I said, you want to respond, not react. Now, if you split it from top to bottom, top all the way down to the bottom, on the left-hand side, you have relationships, and that's how you are dealing with individuals, whether you're in the reactive mode or in the creative mode. On the right side, over here, you are dealing with tasks, how you get things done, who's doing what, how are things executed. And that happens from a creative perspective or a reactive perspective. Now, this is a sample profile. The one thing I want you to take note of really quick here is that the dark green lines is how the person perceives and rated themselves. The green shaded light green area is how those that rated this person responded. So understand, in the 360, you are getting a full feedback profile. You are responding to yourself. You're getting a response from direct reports. You're getting a response from peers. You're getting a response from friends and other relationships. And then you're getting a response from your leadership. So when that happens, you're getting a full aggregated look at how they actually perceive you. Now, when I give you the really kind of Cliff Notes version, with the person scoring themselves outside of that light green, that means that there is a big gap, and you can see the space in between there and how they perceive themselves and how they come off to others versus how those interacting with that person feels. And we look at this as a score from 0 to 100 and what that actually means. So for this profile, we really want leaders to be in this creative wedge, because that's where the openness comes. That's where the grace comes. That's where the expansion comes. If the person is in reactive mode, which is under here, this is really about being defensive and protective and feeling as if you're almost being attacked. And so when we use this, we look at ways at how can we take our leaders into more creative areas of operating and allowing them to have their people watching them or observing them or working with them grow to understand them differently. But it also takes that individual looking at their own behavior and how they can adjust that so that you close this gap up a little bit. So there's a lot more that I can say to this, and I don't want to speak to it in error, but I wanted to be able to give you that snapshot because this is very, very powerful. And what I have a tendency to see is that down here, you can't see all the wedges, but when you get the actual PowerPoint, you may. But this gets into compliance and conforming and controlling and being critical, all on this downside, which is the perfectionist piece. And you begin to see how those overlap with the saboteurs from positive intelligence. And then on the top, that's where we're looking at how you walk authentically, how you participate and grow your people and mentor them. How do you grow yourself? How do you operate in a system? How do you achieve getting things done? Do you do that by delegating and having more tasks, or are you really engaging and getting your people motivated to do the work, which is over here on the relationship side? So I'll stop for the sake of time to honor our commitment together and answer any questions at this point that may come up about the leadership circle or anything in general before we really need to close out today. And there's a couple more slides on there. You'll get them along with the actual websites. There's so much to talk about here, but are there any questions? I think I see one. I love the parking lot analogy. Yep, it's not about judging, it's about observing. Yes. Okay. Any other comments coming in?
had a question. What is an example of going from reactive to creative? Like, what is a way to
Mhm.
go from, that
Yes.
how you work with your clients?
Yeah, so reactive to creative, and as I shared, those are mini wedges that you see down there. So you have to take a look at, where am I being reactive? Is it that every time somebody questions the way I choose to work on a project, if I'm in an organization, or do business, that I jump on them? This is my team, it's my division, I'm going to do it my way. That might be reactive, defending what you believe is the right way to do it. Creative may be an engaging conversation where you're actually looking at the person who might be presenting this trigger to you. First, you're stopping, you're reflecting, and then you're saying, can we have a conversation? Is it possible for you to share with me what was your idea in moving this project along in a certain timeline or in a certain way? Doesn't mean you have to buy in and adapt to it, but what you've done is you've opened yourself up in a creative way to hear what somebody, the other, has to say, which may not be about attacking you. It may be giving you information where that blind spot, because you're real protective down there in how you operate. I see this a lot with my clients, where they have come from really toxic work environments, where the thumb was put on them for controlling and being blamed for all things that were going wrong or incorrect, because there were tight timelines. There was no room for error. There were expectations set that were unrealistic because the goals weren't clear. So if a person is operating in that, and organizations operate in toxic ways sometimes for years, it doesn't mean it's short term. So that becomes ingrained in the person, and that response continues. So you have to unlearn that, see how it's impacted you, and then say, what's the way that I truly want to be, or who is it that I am? We may be a certain way and be really surprised when somebody says, she's defensive, she never can take a response or a comment that I make. And you might say, gosh, I feel like I am the most open person in the world, but I'm not feeling that coming from them, that they don't see that. And the reason may be your saboteur is popping up and blocking that, because you are feeling so defensive and not allowed the space to make a mistake or to grow or to expand. So it's a push and pull situation. And that's why I like it with organizations and individuals, because it helps us look at the organization with what needs to change from a culture's perspective to an individual behavior perspective. I hope that was helpful.
Yes, that was like the perfect example for me. I came from a toxic organization, and now I'm in an organization that's really way different, and I'm
Mhm.
struggling. I mean, just
Okay.
even a few years in, I'm struggling with that defensive part because I had to be like that in my other organization. So it's rough.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And unlearning that and peeling back those layers, you have to allow yourself time to heal as well. I want to encourage you. I can't see you on the screen, but you have my email. If you please want to just reach out, we can have, a private conversation and just explore that. And, as I have with She Leads, She Speaks on the past occasion, if you reach out to me, I am going to give you a complimentary session or two. And if you need to explore some of these assessments, I'm more than willing to do that. So just know that you have a resource and a person behind you, and you can do it and explore without feeling as if you're being judged. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.